Beyond 3D. Good evening and welcome to our first show for 2017. You're on Beyond 3D, Saturday night, broadcasting live from the RPP studios on the beautiful Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, Australia. Tonight my co-host Matt Adams is away this weekend on an assignment. You've got yours truly for the next hour, and a little housekeeping first. If you happen to be looking for Beyond 3D tonight, we're number 5 on Google, and that link will send you to our Facebook page, which is Beyond 3- and the letter D. So tonight I'd like to present a recent pre-edited talk and once again share the experiences and knowledge of Dr. Stephen Greer with his cooperation with the French and Australian government and their work on disclosure. Dr. Stephen Greer is an esteemed trauma surgeon, UFO disclosure spearhead, and a global truth seeker. So tonight, Beyond 3D would like to present to you Dr. Stephen Greer and his recent work with the French government and the Australian government on the Disclosure Project. Enjoy. Beyond 3D.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon.
I'm a doctor in an ER taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks, and I'm being asked to brief the CIA director on stuff because he and the president are being lied to. What?
He said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And I said, whose?
If the average person knew that the term UFO was actually concocted after they knew that they were extraterrestrial vehicles or man-made anti-gravity devices, they would realize that for 60 years we've already had the solution to the environmental crisis, the energy crisis, and global poverty. The most dangerous thing going on the planet today isn't ISIS, it's not Iraq, it's not Russia, it's not China. It's a out-of-control, covert group that is not being overseen by the people, the Congress, or the president, who have developed these technologies and are recklessly using them to track and target extraterrestrial vehicles. The result of this is that we're in a crisis that is unacknowledged, ironically, because these projects are unacknowledged.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
There is no threat, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space.
So either they don't exist, but if they are, they're a threat. So this is the 1-2 punch that's been going on, unfortunately, for 60-some years. He said, do you know why they killed Marilyn?
Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
And I said, well, I didn't until I got this document. It's a virtual death warrant.
When they found out that Tesla had passed away, they came in, they had the manager of the hotel open the safe, and they took all of Tesla's papers.
Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's an urban myth or a conspiracy theory. I say, like the hell it is. But I really want to thank everyone for supporting this tonight and coming out. We didn't know how many people would want to come out in the middle of the week like this, but I was in Europe doing a CE5 training expedition in Portugal, which I'm just fresh off the farm in Portugal. We were on a farm actually, and it was beautiful, and I'll maybe have time to share some of what happened during that expedition. And we did a similar presentation to this, but not live webinar, in Lisbon with wonderful people there, and some people who were in the military there came and shared their stories of some encounters with us with these ET spacecraft. So, it's a wonderful opportunity here in London, by the way, for you guys to organize around contact groups in CE5, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, and also disclosure efforts. Because the two powerhouses on the secrecy of this whole subject are, in descending order, number 1, United States, number 2, Great Britain. Number 3, everyone else. And you're seeing a document up here I'm going to talk about in some length of what has happened over the last 7 or 8 years with the French Ministry of Defense. And the irony of being the head of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the founder of the Global Disclosure Movement is that since that date, I've been sitting on the most important government document in the history of the UFO subject, but didn't feel I could share it because I didn't want to burn bridges to the Sarkozy regime and the Ministry of Defense officials working with the French government at that time. I feel at this point enough water has passed under the bridge that I can share it, so that's why I'm sharing it here in London and worldwide, and soon it will be up on our website. The key thing to understand is that there's 2 things going on with the projects that we founded 25 years ago this month. In fact, this is the 25th anniversary of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And it started as an effort to organize people, a citizens diplomacy effort, to end sort of the hegemony of covert programs on the issue and let the average person make contact and be the face of humanity instead of a bunch of petro-Nazis and militarists and warmongers and misanthropic money whores. Other than that, I have no opinion about the subject. And but the whole impetus was the concept of transdimensional physics and the interface between consciousness and non-locality in physics, what Einstein called the spooky theory. All right, we'll get into this a little bit later. And so, you know, by 1991, 92, we'd gone to Belgium and had some amazing close encounters of the 5th kind, which is when humans initiate contact and these interstellar vehicles and people show up. And then we went down to Florida and had a group of about 50, 60 people just for a weekend. And as you've all seen in the film Sirius, there were these 4 ET craft that just materialized in the sky. That's the videotape when the guy with a very deep southern accent is going, "Holy damn hot shit!" Yeah. I questioned whether I should edit that out of the documentary Sirius, but I just said, no, that's cool, it's authentic, it's cinema verite, so let's leave it in. And so from then on, what happened is that the intelligence community took note of what we were doing. The Disclosure Project was an outgrowth of Project Starlight, which, as many of you may know, was the initiative that I started, that then Lawrence Rockefeller played a support role in, not a primary role in, to brief the Clinton administration, etc. In December of 1993, independent from anything Lawrence Rockefeller wanted to do, I was asked to brief the sitting director of the CIA in the United States. My wife, who is here, Emily, thank you. Emily, by the way, we definitely wouldn't be here without my wife, Emily. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, we just had our 36th anniversary. Yeah, I know. Cool. But the people, you know, who started this project with me, we never thought it would be of that much interest to the government because it was really a citizens' effort. But by the time President Clinton got elected and was in office, the folks who were his senior national security advisors in Inner Circle had been contacted by people following my work and said, you know, this is really happening. And they knew in the intelligence community that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact, meaning non-locality in consciousness, coherent thought, like laser is a coherent light. We're going to talk about this. And transdimensional physics, how interstellar systems interface with coherent thought. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook said his next thing he wants to work on is how to actuate the technologies with thought. So a lot of people are picking up on this concept 25 years later. But if you're dealing with interstellar civilizations, they figured this all out a few thousand years ago, a few million years ago, maybe 10 million years ago. And the universe is 14 billion years old, so who knows how long ago some of these civilizations have figured out these technologies. All I can say is they work. And they work because, as I shared with the CIA director's wife at dinner, you can't get there from here, as we say in Maine. You cannot communicate using the speed of light across interstellar distances. You have to drop out of 3D, 4D, go into transdimensional physics, and if you go into these other dimensions, you are interfacing with the realm of thought, consciousness, thought forms, etc., and so on very quickly. So all of these civilizations have figured that out. And in a way, it was a shocking concept 25 years ago, except if you looked at the research, there were a lot of people who were doing things with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, Stanford Research International, doing remote viewing, people like Ingo Swann, who is a friend of mine, some of you may have heard the name, David Morehouse, others. And what they found was that, in fact, those systems work, and Dr. Bob John, J-A-H-N at Princeton, a professor of engineering, found that actually if you put your awareness on a random number generation, you can shift whether putting out zeros or ones. And that if two people who love each other or are united do it, it's an exponential increase. And this has been reproducible over and over and over again in many scientific models, even though it flies in the face of the conventional reductionist linear 3-4D model.
Beyond 3D.
So, in the upper echelons, or I should say deeper echelons, of the intelligence community and military and also academia, this is really well understood. It's only the mainstream media and sort of the mediocre academics and mediocre government people who don't understand this. But the exceptional and folks do. So when we started experimenting with this, and boom, it immediately got on the radar scope of the intelligence community, much to my chagrin. And we were approached by some folks who first threatened me, and I told them on their no uncertain terms I cannot be threatened or bought off or intimidated. I basically said, go away. But they persisted, and what we have found is that whatever we have tried to do for disclosure and contact, there's a countermeasure that gets created by the intelligence community. And this is true at the level of presidential intelligence and even folks who direct, your government and MI5, MI6, your Ministry of Defense head. And as you all know, Lord Hill Norton, everybody familiar with Lord Hill Norton, he'd been your MOD head years ago. And when I was at his cottage here in Hampshire, he says, the whole time that I was head of the Ministry of Defense, and of course MI5 and MI6 by extension, you don't have a separate CIA director type person, I was never told anything about this. I only found out about this after the fact. And he was very upset about it. And most people would assume someone at that level of your intelligence community or your Ministry of Defense, major G7 country, group of 7 country, top economy in the world, would be knowledgeable and would be pulled into the briefings on this subject. But they are not. And the same is true in the United States, for the most part. Now, people say, well, why is it that some CIA directors have known and others haven't? And some MOD folks have known and others haven't. And I always point out, it has nothing to do with your rank, nothing to do with your position, nothing to do whether you're a doctor, a PhD, an MD, and in this case also an admiral in the Ministry of Defense. It's all based on whether you are going to go along with the agenda. No, not the alien agenda. The agenda of secrecy. Because this subject, as you all know, once disclosed properly and in a hopeful and productive way, would leave no aspect of life on this planet unchanged. Up to and including the complete rearrangement of our macroeconomic system, our energy system, political system, social system, and ultimately major religious systems and thought. That, of course, is enough to keep the brakes on anything. Because as a very interesting guy at the Jet Propulsion Labs once told me, he said, he was talking about these obelisks and other objects on the moon, on Mars, and some of the other structures out there, which do exist, by the way. And Buzz Aldrin even recently called for going back to Mars to investigate them, right? You may not know that, he did. And, but this guy at JPL said, we can't disclose that to the public. I said, why not? It's old stuff. These are old structures, millions of years old. This is not something a few thousand years old. He said because it would show the ancient connection between other civilizations and the development of intelligent life on Earth, and that would collapse the foundations of every fundamentalist orthodox belief system of every religion on Earth. I said, well, good. He says, no, you don't understand. There's a lot of power there. This big of a change they do not want to see happen. All right? So you have that aspect of it. Let's call it a paradigm shift on a deep philosophical, spiritual level. Then you have the shift that would be on the level of the macroeconomic system, which the system of look at these lights and everything here is running off of 1940s atomic power, if you have a nuclear power plant, or late 1800s fossil fuels, right? So we basically have a civilization that its entire system is running on a 70 to a 120-year-old paradigm of energy and a macroeconomic system that goes with it. So if you change that, you have to be prepared for the biggest change in the history of the human race. I estimate that everything that is from the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s to now would be eclipsed by an order of magnitude 10-fold greater within 20 years of the disclosure of this information and the technologies that are attendant to it, that pull energy out of the zero-point energy field and allow for the Z plane of travel, levitation, boom. So there it is. Peter Thiel, one of the co-founders of the PayPal with Elon Musk, who now has, as you know, the Tesla Motors, said recently in an interview on CNN, basically there have been no technological developments in 50, 60 years of any consequence. It still takes you the same amount of time to go from JFK to Heathrow now as it did in 1964 on a Boeing 707 instead of an Airbus 380. Same thing. And so when you look at that, this is always a shocker to people who say, I'm working the high-tech industry. I said, we don't have any high-tech industry on planet Earth. And as Michio Kaku points out, we're not even a level 1 civilization. We're level 0. Level 1 is you're living peacefully and not cannibalizing your biosphere and has the sustainable energy systems that don't damage the environment. That's level 1. So we're level 0. Now our group is going out, initiating contact with civilizations that are at level 300. Get it? Okay, so it's so there is a bit of a gap. We have some splaining to do, but actually that gap can be closed very quickly once people stop lying about this issue. And this is why the intelligence community became so interested. And it wasn't because of the concept of disclosure per se, it was the vision of interplanetary contact, interstellar contact. And that's why the French Ministry of Defense contacted us. Just the same reason that the intelligence community in the United States did so. They were extremely interested in how is contact made, and they vowed to embark on a long-term journey to do just that, for peaceful purposes. This is why we'll go through this in a moment, this is the most important document ever written from a government entity. And the attachment is even more astonishing, which is an attachment of all the protocols to be used as contact is made and how it's evaluated, with the full resources of the Ministry of Defense of France. Why is that important? Because it's a baby step of a major country doing something that should have happened in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, had there not been a complete subversion by covert military interests, which Eisenhower, the President of the United States, and a 5-star general warned us about. And also Lord Hill Norton, a 5-star admiral, a Sea Lord, said that he came to realize that our entire civilization is really at risk, not from the UFOs or the ETs, but from the secrecy. The first director of the CIA, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the first CIA director, I have a letter that's up on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS disclosure.com, that is from him, where he states that the secrecy attending this issue is a grave threat because the folks who have created the secrecy do not have the best interests of the United States or the United Kingdom or of humanity in interest. They have the most venal interest at heart, and that is global control and domination through a centralized macroeconomic system where pretty much most folks don't realize this. You know, we think we abolished slavery in the mid-1800s. We didn't. It's just the American plantation is a little nicer than the one in the Congo. But there is a masters and slaves mentality amongst the uber elites that control hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of assets that require a centralized petrodollar system and a centralized energy system, of which has been an obsolete paradigm for well on 100 years now. So this information coming out isn't just about are we alone in the universe or not. Most conventional astrophysicists agree that we're not. Now, where they disagree is that they would have the ability to get to Earth, because being the egomaniacs most academics are, and scientists in general, with all due respect to any scientists here, every generation thinks that they know everything. So they can't imagine there'd be a civilization so far advanced beyond us that they could get from 4 or 5 million light years away to here. But that's exactly, I'm going to show you a picture later of an interstellar ambassador who did just that from the Andromeda Galaxy. And so I'm going to show you the most important document and also the most important picture in the history of the UFO subject and how that happened tonight.
Beyond 3D.
Now, all of that brings up this question of, if the governments of the world don't do this, then the people should. And that's what I concluded in the 1990s, that the people lead, the leaders will have to follow eventually. But it isn't going to be through passivity. You're going to have to organize your own contact teams, which Mark here in England has done and gone out. You're going to have to organize your own disclosure witnesses who are deep whistleblowers in your Ministry of Defense and MI5 and MI6. And you're going to have to encourage the government to try to begin to catch up with what the French are doing, and which a government I cannot discuss because it's a negotiation and process is about to launch on, but it's one of the most important countries in the world, not American or UK or French. You can go guess. There are a few. So, and also they're wanting to push hard on bringing out the technologies. Now, we hope their prime minister doesn't get assassinated trying. But, you know, and believe me, the threats that I get on a weekly basis into my project is, you know, amazing. But these people in governmental positions need to take the responsibility, and you need to hold their feet to the fire if they don't. And then take matters into your own hand. By the way, isn't there a bloke named Gary McKinnon or something like that here in the UK? After the Disclosure Project events in 2001, this young lad decided he'd start digging into this subject and hacked into some computers. And he got prosecuted. They tried to extradite him to the United States. I reached out to his attorney and said, look, you're arguing this all on the wrong merits. All on the wrong merits. Anybody in here who's a whistleblower, listen, and everyone online listening, I know there are people listening in these divisions, classified, above, top secret, unacknowledged projects, are listening to this. Do not buy into the legality of the national security orders and oaths related to this subject. They're all null and void. We vitiated them back in 1998. They were completely vitiated. because we were able to prove that both in your country and in the United States, the president, the director of the CIA, the top people at the Pentagon and the intelligence, the J2, head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is as big as the CIA, but is its own in-house thing at the Pentagon, all of whom I personally briefed, every single one of them to a man, and including your Lord Hill Norton, had been denied access to these projects. A priori, the projects are unconstitutional and they're illegal. And if they're illegal, the rule of law does not pertain to the operations attending thereto. Got it? Yeah. Therefore, anyone who wishes to step forward, documents, materiel, biologicals, technologies, they are free to do so without penalty of law, because the operations themselves are illegal. Now, when I got threatened in 1991, 92, 93 by some folks from the agency and the FBI doing what I was doing, I said, really? Come put on the bracelets. You want to get on the dance floor? Let's get on the dance floor right now. Excuse my French. Because I will clean your clock if this goes to trial and you try to put me in prison, because I will be able to then hit subpoenas to this CIA director I briefed, and to these generals, and to these admirals, and to your MOD head. And when they testify that we don't know anything about these projects, they're unacknowledged special access projects which are illegal, I'm going to have you point, set, match. So just stay out of my way. And they did, because I haven't been imprisoned. And I put on the street many, many top secret documents. Now, that's what Gary McKinnon's lawyer should have ordered or argued. He argued all the wrong things, completely untutored on what the constitutional theories are for the Disclosure Project. Does this make sense? Now, when we went from Project Starlight, which was the initiative, and the documents are up on our website. By the way, the AP sued, the Associated Press sued the Clinton Library to get them released. And they were released officially. Signed by myself and a bunch of cosmonauts and astronauts and former KGB people from all over the world, saying, lead this effort to end the secrecy, etc., and so on. When I realized that the president wouldn't act, the Congress wouldn't act, then I said, then we're going to act. That's how the Disclosure Project happened. It was the default position. The first was offered to our leaders, including your own. And by the way, there's a guy named Nick Pope, who used to be with the Ministry of Defense. When we had the Alton Barnes event, where there was an interstellar vehicle that materialized in the field and was floating towards us at the wee hours of the morning, MOD found out about it, and Colin Andrews was contacted by Nick Pope when he was working there and said, would you come to London for a meeting? I said, sure. So that I met him when he was still in that office. But he admitted he just gathered intelligence and kicked it upstairs, and it went into a black hole. He had no idea where it went. And he admitted that. And that's when he was still working there. So, and perhaps he still works for them, I don't know. But the point I'm making is it's highly, highly compartmentalized. So when the French first approached me, I'm giving you this background so there's some context of understanding why and how this happened. They first contacted us through some very prominent French diplomats, and who said to me, look, we're very interested in pursuing this for peaceful purposes, because I made it very clear I would not be involved in an operation that militarized the contact or had any weapon systems on site or involved, except to keep the bad guys away from us, including radar systems, air support, naval support, ground forces, special forces. And that's what I requested. And they said, fine, we'll do it. And what ended up happening is that they were gathering information on what was really going on the subject in the United States, and to an extent, indirectly, in the UK. And they found out, of course, something that they didn't think was possible, because it sounds like a bad John le Carré novel or a conspiracy theory. And I wrote to them and then had some phone calls and said, look, what you have to understand is that in the United States, between and this was back then, 100 and 200 billion US dollars a year go unaccounted for in the Department of Defense and intelligence community. No one even knows where it's going. As you know from the film Serious, Donald Rumsfeld himself, no flaming liberal, he said there was $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budget. Now the estimates are around $8.5 trillion, 14 years later after 9/11. Trillion. So the bottom line is America, the United States of America, loses and can account for more money each year than the entire Eurozone and Great Britain together's military budgets. And actually more than the budget of China, which just hit $110 billion this year, which is a rounding error in the United States. I mean, that's, nobody notices 110 billion, nobody notices that at all. Our budget is $5 trillion in the United States government. So that's the problem. It is such a corrupt morass. And I'm a proud American. My mother's family were, I'm sorry to say this in London, some of the original founders of the United States fighting the British, but we love you now. But God bless all. But she used to go on and on about that, because in America you have these old dowagers who are daughters of the American Revolution, and they're very crudmudgeons. And my dad is half Cherokee Indian, Native Americans, and he says, "What the hell, woman? My people are waiting for the Mayflower to get here." Yeah. I said, "Touche." But that's, when you look at that kind of spending that is unaccounted for, and it isn't as if the president has access to those projects, or your prime minister for the component that is going on in the United Kingdom, or most ministers of defense and most CI directors. But some do and some don't. And the ones who do, it's because they came up through the ranks and they did what I call a soul biopsy. I'm a trauma doctor, so I use medical analogies. So, if you want to take a biopsy of something to look at it, so they do an analysis of the person's values, beliefs, and ultimately it's whether they'll go along with the agenda of secrecy and criminality. Because when I presented this situation to your former Minister of Defense, Lord Hill Norton, and I'm sitting at his cottage, and he's this old guy, steely blue eyes, and I explained, he said, "Why wouldn't they have told me?" And he was hurt, and a bit peeved, actually, mad, and his pride was hurt. I mean, imagine being in that position and being kept in the dark about the biggest secret in history. And he knew by then it was all true. And I said, "Well, let me answer your question with a question. What would you have done if you found that there was an illegal, super secret, unacknowledged special access project, transnational, not international, transnational, transects geopolitical boundaries, that is sitting on the technologies that would give us a new civilization without poverty or pollution, that they have enforced the secrecy through murder, mayhem, lies, deception, and intimidation, up to and including high officials in governments, both governments, including your government." He said, "I wouldn't have stood for it for a bloody minute." And he was just like in a lather. And I said, "That's why they didn't tell you."
Beyond 3D.
They didn't tell you. So if you're someone who is fundamentally an honest and good person, they're not going to read you into this. That's military speak for brief you. They're not going to get read into a project like this. So when I began to explain how utterly, completely dysfunctional the American military-industrial, laboratory, corporate, financial system is, and how deep black it actually operates. Anything important almost never is brought to the attention of the President of the United States. I can say this with some real solid authority. Or your Prime Minister, Cameron Brown. Isn't that who he is? Yeah. For now. So those are placeholders. It's a little bit like the Truman Show. Everybody see the movie in the Truman Show? You have people who are, it's sort of a thing with Jim Carrey where he's living this world and it all ends up to be a set and it's all fake. I don't know, it's a great movie to look. It's a great, interesting parallel to this. And so the Truman Show is pretty much what our normal political system is, including most of the good people who are in your Ministry of Defense, intelligence community, politicians, etc. It's an extremely tightly compartmented operation. It's been very well funded. The other part to understand is nothing important of any strategic significance is above the surface of the earth. If it's above ground level, it's not really that important. It's fungible, replaceable. Everything critical is underground bases, all throughout the United States, Australia, Pine Gap, and also here in the UK. So anything that is critically important is not sitting above ground. You're not going to see it with a spy satellite, you're not going to see it from an aircraft, and access is multiple levels of entry. I've been in a couple places like this. So that's basically how it's managed. Super secret, illegally, and they tell the people they think they can manipulate. But they will tell certain people a little bit of information if they think they can manipulate them by giving them a little piece of it, usually a distorted piece. We had a president named Reagan, who put all this effort into the SDI Star Wars initiative, which is really a cover story for putting platforms in space targeting interstellar vehicles, which is what we're doing. It really had nothing to do with brilliant pebbles. That was all just sort of a cover story. The real money was going into interstellar targeting and tracking of these ET craft and shooting them down, which we've been doing for a very long time. And they told him just enough information in a xenophobic way, in a way that was scary, to get his cooperation with that project. And that's why at the UN, if you Google it, you'll see that Reagan said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity and peace be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? Very familiar theme. Douglas MacArthur in 1950s, his last address to the Congress, said World War III will be interplanetary. This has been planned since I was 1 year old. I just turned 60 in June. Still bench 410. Anyway, but I know I'm very eccentric about my workouts. But that's the problem, is that this secrecy has to do with another whole issue, and that is creating the psychological propaganda and the juggernaut so that people will accept the cost of the next level of militarizing the planet. Going from, and actually Wernher von Braun said, it would go from the Cold War to nations of concern, rogue states, to global terrorism. This was all in the disclosure stuff before 9/11. And then objects in space that could be a threat. You hear all this stuff about asteroids and stuff, to playing the final card, the alien threat, of which there is none. But it'd be great if people could be convinced there is, because they could support then, instead of $1 trillion a year coming into the military system, it could be $5 trillion or $6 trillion or $8 trillion, because the whole world, like the movie Independence Day, would unite. Let's kick alien butt. You see? It's jingoism of the worst kind of propaganda and brainwashing, which 99.9% of people who study the UFO subject have been completely infected with. And that creates its own problem, because ultimately, if you're going to have the public approach this subject in a way that's going to be helpful, it doesn't help to trade humans fighting with each other like murderous monkeys that we have for thousands of years, to starting to fight within other planetary systems. This is not progress. So progress requires a more universal outlook based in the concepts of cosmic awareness and universal peace. It cannot break down into, oh, well, yes, we're not alone in the universe, but by the way, there's some out here we need to be fighting. Why? Because if we do that, it's the end of the world, period. It really is. You're talking about weapon systems that are scalar electromagnetic systems that go beyond the speed of light. You know what a scalar is? Or longitudinal? Everybody know what this is? I'm going too far too fast. Well, a quick course in it. The light you see in this room has a wave component, right? And it's 186,000 miles per second is how it travels. A longitudinal scalar is not a wave, but longitudinal in a point, and it's at multiples of the speed of light. You weaponize that, you got something. And the United States has weaponized it. So that's the systems that they're using to track target interstellars as they come through the crossing point of light, step down from other dimensions into this dimension, hit it, boom, down they go. You hear of all these crash retrievals that have happened over the year, that's how they've happened. And I know exactly what the technologies are. I know men who've worked on the systems and operated them, much to their regret. And this then requires some people in governments and the grassroots to say, let's find a better way of making contact. Let's not recreate the mistakes of the last few thousand years, because a new era has opened, the hallmark of which is universal peace, not interstellar war. As great as that is for selling Hollywood movies, it's a very short future. Timeline, boom, stop. Right? Because we're not talking about these. You weaponize this kind of information and technology, it makes a hydrogen bomb look like a tinker toy. So we have got to understand that the existential crisis we have is really in consciousness and our social and spiritual development. But that has to be then applied into our policy. And what's beautiful about this is that even after explaining all this to the Ministry of Defense officials and their Air Force folks and intelligence officials in France, well, the first thing they said was, this is fantastic and terrible, when I explained the nature of secrecy in the United States, United Kingdom, and many other countries. And they said, well, I don't know how much we can do, we'll do what we can. As soon as they faxed me information about what they wanted to do with our team to go and make contact, they got a call. Their ambassador from France to the United States got a rather nasty call, irate, and said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And the ambassador from France to the United States said, well, we're planning to initiate this research project, but also a peaceful rapprochement with these interstellar visitors in a scientific but a visionary way, and we're cooperating with Dr. Greer and his team to do so. And the intelligence folks in the U.S. on the other side said, just stay away from any U.S. assets in any U.S. territory. And the guy said, look, it'll be on French soil, so bug off. And that's how that conversation went. But so there were all manner of delays, which when you see the translation of this letter, you'll see it, the Admiral Morin is apologizing for the delays because there's all this interference going on. You don't step onto this stage without, I mean, you're going to, anyway, you're going to have the whole thing coming at you like a freight train, which we have. But the French stayed true to their purpose, and we eventually did a fantastic CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind event. Now, was anyone there in France in 2010 or 11? Yeah? Most people don't know that they were there to be trained, but it was actually an event for the Admiral and the Ministry of Defense. So they piggybacked their, is this disturbing or interesting? I don't know which. This is the way I have to do things. They wanted to be discreet. So they piggybacked their Admiral and their systems on a public CE5. And of course they were there sitting in plaid shirts and looked like just regular Frenchmen. But the whole area, we're on a 2,200 acre estate, was cordoned off. And you'll see a photograph from a trans-dimensional ET vehicle that blipped in and blipped out very quickly there. But they tracked objects going over the site in excess of 200,000 kilometers an hour. And all kinds of phenomena in the field, weird things, like something you see on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We had the cars parked in a hayfield and some interstellar trans-dimensional energy form went up and down the cars and turned the lights on and off, did all kinds of strange things.
Beyond 3D.
So they were very, very pleased with that, and so then they've sort of gone on from there. But the idea, just the idea that a Ministry of Defense official at this level, very senior admiral, and his team, working at the highest levels of the French government, would say, we want to pursue interstellar and intergalactic contact for peaceful purposes. This is huge news. This is an enormous development. The superlatives really can't reach it, just the idea that they'd go this far, and that they try it, and that they came, and that there's still operations going on, but they're keeping very quiet about it. Part of it is that there are elements of this so-called majestic group, MJ12. It's actually the Majority Committee on Intelligence. That's really what it stands for. That was founded decades ago. Have representation in France and also in French industry, and there's been a lot of pressure to cease and desist in France, as there would be against anyone in your government who initiated it. But at a certain point, can't we get together behind these folks and say, we're going to do it, and we're not going to be intimidated, and we're not going to be stopped, because it's time for us to go into this future that is peaceful and universal, and allow the public to know in an open CE5 event. This demonstration event in France was just a demonstration event for them. But eventually I see in the future, and I've had very lucid dreams of the future, where there's absolutely open contact with the full cooperation of governments and the military around the world, where they realize what a mistake they made making this secret, and what a mistake they've made creating an adversarial dynamic between humans and these interstellar civilizations. So I see that happening, and this was the first major crack in that wall of not only silence, but of stupidity. The stupidity of a militaristic approach to something that should never have been militarized. Never should have been militarized. And, there's a senator in America named Barry Goldwater, who's passed away. He ran for president in 1964. And I was at his home in Arizona some years ago, and he had left the Senate. John McCain, the Senator McCain who ran for president against Obama in 2008, he took his seat. And I was at his home, and he said to me, he had found out about this information because he was a general in the Air Force Reserves and had been on every committee, Intelligence Committee of the Senate, Armed Services. He says, but I never got anything official about it. I only found out about from pilots and whatnot. I said, yeah, of course. They're not going to tell you at the Senate Intelligence Committee. They're never going to brief you on this. And, and he looked at me, and he just said, what do you want to do? I said, I need your help to bring this information out. And he says, yes, you're right, it's time. He says, it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now that this was ever made secret. And I'm sitting in his living room. Very interesting. This is a right-wing conservative Republican saying this, and a military guy. So I said, well, what can you do to help? He says, I don't know. I said, who do you know? He says, well, I know everybody. I said, okay. So I started going through some names of current members of this committee, the Majority Intelligence Committee on Interstellar Matters, MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C. And I got to one name, and he knew the name. And it was Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. And Admiral Inman had been head of the National Security Agency, and before that, one of the deputy directors of CIA. But he left the government and got onto the board of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, which is one of the crown jewels of the contracting business dealing with anti-gravity and ET and UFO issues in La Jolla, California. And he says, oh, I know Bobby Ray. We've been friends for years. I said, well, give him a call, would you? So he did. Got a call from him later. He says, I can't make any more phone calls like that for you. He says, they read him the Riot Act, and Admiral Inman was very clear, stay off of this if you know what's good for you and your family. So Goldwater tried to help us, got kind of shut down. Admiral Bill Colby, the CI director under Ford, was going to give us a 0-point free energy device and some just starter seed money of around $50 million to get it out to the public as an open source system. The week he was going to meet with a member of my board of directors, they found him floating down the Potomac River. Yeah, that's what happened to Bill Colby. So there's been a lot of sacrifice to get us this far. And so I think people have to understand that at a certain point, you've got to pull the folks together and have a mass movement to do it within government, but also with the public. And that's what we're working to do, to make contact, to effect disclosure, and to bring out these technologies, all three. You can't do one without the other. And by the way, that's why the subject in general is secret. Everyone says, well, couldn't they bring out the medical healing technologies? I said, no, because the physics behind transdimensional healing energetically is the same that would run your house without a power bill and use of petrol. Well, can't they just disclose that the ETs are? I said, yeah, no. If they disclose that the ETs are real and they're here, or even those old objects on Mars, aside from collapsing the fundamentalist belief systems of people who think we rode dinosaurs like the Flintstones, that's 25% of Americans believe that, by the way. No, it's a true statistic. You know how you're riding the dinosaurs like that? They have a museum in Kentucky, $27 million, where they teach children that this is actually our history. Ideas so untutored it beggars the imagination. But anyway, everyone's free to their belief, and they're sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. And so this then, becomes, all this has to come together. And even if you acknowledge that there's intelligent life out there that has managed to get here, the very first question any astute scientist is going to ask is, how did they get here? When that question is asked, it shall be answered. When it's answered, it's the end of the world as we know it, like the REM song, but I feel fine. All right, because there goes oil, there goes gas, there goes your public utilities, transmission lines, nuclear power, internal combustion engines in the boot of your car, not the boot, the bonnet of your car, you call it, or boot if it's some cars. Jet engines, obsolete, 1930s technologies. Rockets, 1940s. Everything changes. Everything changes. It's huge. So that is what they're forestalling. And by the way, one of the reasons why most public officials won't act on this is because they don't want to manage the change. I had a very interesting this is why this is such an act of courage, amazing courage by the French. God bless them. Because an admiral in the United States who is head of CONUS, Continental United States Security, very powerful guy, he said to us, my team, we were meeting with him, and he said, yes, you're absolutely right, this should come out. He says, but my real task is maintaining the status quo and the homeostasis of the global energy supply. That's it. That's why we're in the Middle East. And he says, what you're proposing would be so much change so quickly that no one wants to manage it. I want to retire from this command and go fishing at my ranch in Montana. This is what he said. So a lot of the secrecy is by inertia, is sort of the banality of evil. It's just not wanting to do it because it's easier not to. However, in the meanwhile, you have 7.2 billion people living on late 19th century technologies, destroying the biosphere, the have and have-nots gap growing, which is a prescription for global revolution and terrorism, by the way, of course. And on top of it, you have a renegade group of unacknowledged special access projects who do not answer to your elected and appointed officials or to mine in America, doing as they please, up to and including targeting, tracking, and shooting down these interstellar vehicles, trying to provoke World War III. That's what they're trying to do. Because they've already figured out the technologies.
Beyond 3D.
As you know from the film Sirius, an IBM executive named Jan Harzan was with Ben Rich, the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, the super secret facility that the U2, there's a band, British band called U2, Irish, but there is a band, there's also a jet called the U2. But the U2 came out of the Skunk Works, but that was old stuff, and that was stuff that was conventional spy stuff. The real action at the Skunk Works, just like at Lockheed Martin, my uncle's old company, my uncle worked on the lunar module, the thing that landed on the moon, put the first man there. Northrop Grumman, SAIC, BAE Systems, MITRE Corporation. There's a whole constellation, Raytheon and E-Systems. The real high end of it is the trans-dimensional physics, the technologies, the ET issue, anti-gravity, wrong word, electromagnetic-gravitic systems, high voltage systems you put over something that can float and zip like that. In 1954, October, there was a man who was on our team, worked with us for many years, he's recently passed away, so I'll mention who he is. Third highest ranking guy at the Naval Research Labs, the largest Department of Defense labs in the United States, named Rick Foch, F-O-C-H. He was in the vault and saw documents where in October of 1954 we had mastered gravity control. So a lot of the things you see zipping around are not interstellar. Many of them are ours. And there's the state-of-the-art research facility at the Lockheed Skunk Works in the high desert of California near the Edwards complex is a subterranean facility called the Cube, C-U-B-E. And it's a cube-shaped facility deep underground. It's connected through underground connectors to the Nellis Range, mistakenly called Area 51. No one calls it that in the business, by the way. It's a misnomer. The real action there is at Pahut Mesa, Groom Lake, S4, S9, and S12. Those are the proper names. Blackjack Control and Blackjack Operations. I have a document, it's the first document that was in the Obama briefing that lists the code names and project numbers on there. That's a National Reconnaissance Office document. By the way, NRO, National Reconnaissance, they run all the super secret birds, spy satellites. Amazing stuff that they have. And if you go to their headquarters, it says over the door, "We own the night." And I turned to some people on my team, I said, well, we need to own the light. They can have the darkness, we'll have the light. But that's their motto, we own the night. And you can see anywhere, anytime, through cloud, down to anything you're reading. And you can be talking to a friend on the top of Mount Everest or anywhere else, they'll hear every word you're saying if they want to know it. That is true. Ben Rich said this. There are no private conversations anywhere on Earth, number one. So forget Snowden stuff with, PRISM. I mean, that's like level 1 intel gathering NSA. It is. It's like, it's not even, because the president knew about it. And so the Senate, if they knew about it, it's like 40-year-old technology. It's true. Absolutely true. Because the real action's in the unacknowledged special access projects. And so when Ben Rich said we can take ET home, as you saw in the movie series, he meant it. So we had mastered gravity-controlled trans-dimensional systems. Now there's all kinds of conspiracy things. We're not actually allowed to go out there because there's sort of a containment zone around Earth until the rampaging primates make peace. That would be us. And quit clubbing each other over the head over stupidity like ideologies and this ism and that, whatever. We're not allowed to go too far out there. And there is a containment policy. It was lifted for the moon, because we do have facilities there, but no further. I only have a couple hours, so I can't get into all the details of this. I'm trying to give you the big picture. Now, that means, of course, anyone doing this, what I'm going to go through in a moment, is going to be running into the buzzsaw. Anybody read the book Into the Buzzsaw, the foreword by Gore Vidal, about people journalists who tried to blow the cover off huge stories like this, going through the buzzsaw and being chewed up. Some were killed, some died, some had suicides, some got sick, some fired, whatever. But it's an interesting mainstream media book, actually. And you're going to have to contend with the fact, and this was why I brought all these folks to Washington, and I had them meet with senior people on my team who have been in these unacknowledged special access projects and been with me at briefings. You know, I introduced, there's an astronaut named Edgar Mitchell. I introduced him to all this. I brought him to the Pentagon to brief Admiral Tom Wilson, who is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, back in the late 90s, 97. So that is all a process that they needed to know before they stepped into this. Now, I wasn't trying to scare them off, although I may have a bit, because it caused a few-year delay. But I wanted them, in medicine we call it informed consent. And I wasn't going to lie when they asked me what kind of security risks would there be to us doing this. I said, well, first of all, the people keeping the secret transnational. They have representations, covert, deep cover in your country. They have technologies like you cannot believe. And they have reconnaissance over France that will know everything you're doing in real time. So nothing will really be done secretly. So that you factor into bake that into the cake from the get-go. And they went, oh, mon Dieu, you know. And I said, yeah, okay, so it doesn't mean we can't do it, but be aware. So it became this cat and mouse thing to set this event up. That apparently there was a woman here who was there, and some other people I know. And they had to set up a security perimeter, a radar perimeter, divert air traffic, everything for this event. For these 3 nights in the Brittany on a 2,200 acre estate that had been part of a family who ironically helped organize the French Revolution, like my mom's family did in America, but who also specifically organized the beheading of Marie Antoinette. Some very interesting vibes at this estate. Anyway, but welcome to my world, a little strange. But anyway, it was beautiful because the events that happened were just magnificent. Even though, you know, it was not known by, there were 60 people there were only a dozen or so that knew why we were there. But it was an introduction to them of how to go into the samadhi state, remote view interstellar civilizations, create a coherent thought sequence that results in contact, being linked into their electronic systems, ET electronic systems that interface with coherent thought. How to comport oneself when events are taking place, etc., and so on and so forth, as well as what to monitor. And moreover, what the philosophical underpinnings are that lead to successful contact. It cannot be an us versus them military approach, because that leads to nothing but a disaster. And in fact, the last 60 years prove it. Eisenhower did actually meet with ETs at Muroc, M-U-R-O-C, near Edwards, what's now Edwards Air Force Base. I believe it was 54 or 56. I have to look at my documents. And I actually got a letter from someone who was there with Eisenhower at the meeting that was sent to me by the French intelligence. They had it. It was very interesting. I wish a lot of this had made its way into the movie, serious. We're going to do a follow-on documentary if we find the filmmaker who wants to do it. Anybody know a good one? Come to Charlottesville, Virginia, near the University of Virginia. We'll do it within 6 months. So that is, you know, that was something that when they realized that there were all these issues around making contact, but that it could be done if you had the right philosophical perspective, because the ETs are not unwilling to make contact. They're not unwilling to make contact with buffoons or militarists or people who have an antiquated pre-Diluvian worldview that anything we don't understand we have to shoot and kill and knock down out of the sky. You see? But these were highly conscious people, very on board with the philosophical underpinnings that are the prerequisite of contact. And that is why I say this was one of the most important initiatives. So let's scroll down if we can see. I've got my laser pointer and just point out a few. I know most of you don't read French. I certainly don't. I'm a medical doctor where they say it's equivalent to learning 4 foreign languages. So, not yet, but we'll just up at the top. Can you see the red pointer? So this is Dr. Pierre Morin, who's an admiral, who's with the Ministry of Defense, urgent, 16 January 2007. It was also copied to a group that is working with the Ministry of Defense for making contact. It was primarily addressed to me and our host at the estate, Philippe Aubin, and his brother who owned this massive estate in France. So as you scroll down, you'll see the signature and the seal for the Ministry of Defense. Now, if we go to the translation, I'm not going to read through all this. This will be up on the website soon enough. We had someone just recently do a better translation than what we had that I showed in Lisbon, interestingly, which we'll pull up here in a moment. You'll see that the first parts of it are dealing with sort of an apology for the delay. And the delay is the backstory I was telling you about. They had to gather all this intelligence about what they were facing and what kind of countermeasures they might encounter from the American/British/MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C committee.
Beyond 3D.
So that's why the French Ministry of Defense assured its presence for the test attempted contacts beginning the 4th week of this year. They wanted to do it in 2007. It ended up happening, I think, 2010, wasn't it? 2010, my friend who was there. Apology on behalf of the Ministry of Defense for this temporary inconvenience. It's only a temporary delay, and we request all participants to postpone the meeting. The initial CE5 event was going to be in the 20. It's very interesting. It would have been in the summer of 2007. Due to short-term political imperatives, the MOD is obliged to request the participants concerned with the feasibility operation reported the test and contacts be scheduled for the 24th and 25th of this year. This is worded awkwardly, but the actual original is worded awkwardly. The full determination and active collaboration of the MOD at its highest level regarding the entrance of France and its scientific community. And this is an amazing statement. This is addressed to me. By the way, it's not classified, so I can share it. I've just been not sharing it because, again, I wanted to give them time to sort things out. The protocol of reciprocity, meaning with the ETs, of acquired knowledge during the rescheduled experiments of the signing officers in close connection with SPORAD, which is a research group that there's an attached document I'll show you in a moment that's, 20 pages long about the protocols. Will supply all necessary means of materials, human resources, and financial support. This protocol will be based on 4 categories of specifications in coordination with the needs and efforts according to your recommendations with the support of the MOD. Identification of the source of the ET UFO object, procedure and recognition, biological, physiochemical, relative fields, and miscellaneous language, laser signaling, and things of this sort. I don't know what MFP means. Quality of the source, to document the quality of the source, biological if possible, in relation with the validation of our entries and contacts made this category critical. Availability of the source, this category regroups the fields regarding the contact possibilities and future exploitation of the above mentioned. The collaboration of the delegation representation of the Ministry of Defense with its full technical backing requires the agreement from each party on the process, analysis, specification, concept, implementation, necessary means for exploring the scientific results. These results must allow us to conclude in a performance evaluation system in the advanced framework of the more action models regarding the objectives brought through your experimental proposition and the electronic and optical means you wish to use that we accept to put in your disposal during your stay in France. So I had sent a very exhaustive list of the material, what we needed to have in place, the security perimeter, the radar monitoring, the air traffic control diversion, on and on and on. My document is another huge document, which actually ought to be released with this one, shouldn't it? Just thought of that. Make a note, Emily. All right, we'll dig it up out of our archives. The basement of my house is like a very interesting vault. Besides the fact that our imperatives forbid us to take part during the 2 coming weeks, see, we were going to do it in those 2 coming weeks, the request the means of putting at your disposal in absence of all circumstantial recommendations did not allow us to account to our superiors with all the required scientific certainty and to engage a process of long-term exchange on this experimental field with you. What this is trying to say is that the delay was because they couldn't get everyone else on board to do it in 2007, so that's why it got pushed to 2010. In the hope of your understanding and respect for our political imperative. So there are a lot of arms being twisted here. You can read between the lines. That will become a certain commitment and our will hereby affirm to proceed on an exhaustive journey with you on this topic. We will be able to erase the disappointment of the postponement of the first contact that was going to happen at the end of this month. That was in January. On behalf of our representative, I'm pleased to wish you all the best for this coming year and outstanding results for our 2 countries. So, of course, I'm American. So, obviously, this was intercepted by the National Security Agency, and that's when the ambassador to the United States from France got this rather nasty contact. So, this is such an amazing sort of paradigm shift that a Ministry of Defense. So if the French could contemplate doing this at this level, and this was at the highest level, as it said, including political, meaning that the President of France, Sarkozy, why can't it happen in the UK? Why not? You need to break with the Americans on this. And not with the American government, because the American government would be on board with the secret, illegal, corrupt kleptocracy of petro-Nazis and fascists that are running the world amok. You guys need to get your government to do this. Why not? All right? Help me do this in Great Britain. All right, now we'll show the Sparad document, which is, we're not going to go through it, I just want you to get a sense of it. It's this very long tome, I don't know how many pages it is, that goes through all the scientific procedures we're going to do. And that they would engage on. So this becomes a template that can be then taken by other governments. So there's another government in the world that I'm in the process of briefing who are quite interested. And about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, I was on an island in off Australia in the Great Barrier Reef with 120 world leaders. I was asked to be the keynote to talk about this stuff. And the Minister of Defense for Australia was all kinds of people. I'd be honest with you, I thought I'd hurl myself off the dock into the Coral Sea by the time I got off that island, just because it was so stressful. You know, anybody ever read the book To Kill a Mockingbird? But what they used to talk about, the hate stares. You know, that the African Americans would get this hate stare. I know that because I had an African American girlfriend in high school, and let me tell you, this was in the South in 1972 and 3. So the fact that I wasn't lynched and killed then is something of a miracle. But the folks who were, I mean, the head of BP was at this meeting. All these folks, I mean, you know, a bunch of folks with big interest in oil, gas, coal is the only export really Australia has. And I was basically standing up saying, all this is true. There was a physicist there who was collaborating, who was presenting the science behind trans-dimensional electronic systems that pull energy out of the zero-point field, and this in front of 120 of the most powerful people in the world. So there was maybe 20% of them that thought, oh, this is a solution finally to the environmental and da-da-da-da, and the others were looking at me with these hate stares, like, I'm going to kill you. I couldn't get off that island fast enough, let me tell you. It was very stressful. And I couldn't take anybody with me, a security team or anything, so I was just kind of there, you know. And the only way you could get to the island was a private helicopter, which I don't have, or their yacht, the yacht for the island, which was not at my disposal. So I was stuck there for 3 days. It was a very interesting 3 days. This is the kind of stuff I have to do. But from that, and from the film Sirius, which, by the way, last month became the #1 documentary on Netflix in North America. It's not available on Netflix in the UK yet, but there are people all over the world getting really excited about what we're doing, is the point. From the French to these other countries. And I think that what we have to understand is that there are two processes. A lot of people ask, when is disclosure going to happen? I said, well, it already did. We did that 14 years ago. The majority of people in the world think UFOs are real and the government's hiding something. Now, what they really mean to ask is, when do you think official disclosure by the governments and the whatever going to happen? I said, well, that was supposed to happen in 1993 and 94. And that was the indication from the Clinton administration. But it's like when Jimmy Carter wanted to do this in 1976. You know the story? 2 goons with all excess badges went into the private quarters of the White House and said to President Carter, if you would like to complete your first term as president, you will keep your goddamn mouth shut about this. I know for a fact this is what happened. So, look, ultimately it's how courageous are you, and do you have enough people willing to support what you're doing, and are you willing to say, full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes, And I tell people it is about spiritual courage. It doesn't mean we have to go to DEFCON 1 and have war over this. It means we need Defense Condition 1. It means we need to come together and be courageous, spiritual warriors, and have the courage to do the right thing. The lack of courage on this issue, which was, that's why I was so impressed with the French going this far, is why it's secret. It isn't that it can't be done. People aren't courageous enough to stand up to the thugs. But you know what? If Winston Churchill and FDR, Roosevelt, and that generation had that attitude, we'd all be goose-stepping to Adolf Hitler's grandson. Sorry. But we've got to find the courage to do the right thing on this, the most important secret and the most important subject in the history of the human race. Absolutely. And that's really what I think we need to find the leadership for in every country we can. And that's why I continue to work on disclosure efforts while I'm also training people in the public to make contact. Because here's another little fact. I'm one guy. I put my pants on one leg at a time. I'm really just a country doctor from North Carolina, live in Virginia now. But if there are thousands and tens of thousands of people, which is emerging, doing close encounters of the fifth kind in teams, they can track what I'm doing all the time, and they do. But they can't track tens of thousands and millions. They don't have infinite resources. And so by decentralizing this initiative, both for disclosure and contact, is the best way for this to happen. So I'm asking people to think about this. It's a big mistake to think that one person or a few people are going to do this. Years ago, a good friend of Bill Clinton's and Hillary Clinton said, oh, why are you doing this with the public? Just assemble a few of us elites and, blah, blah. It was this masters of the universe, the elitist idea. I said, no. I said, first of all, that won't work. Secondly, they're going to know what we're doing, that are adversaries in magic. Third, if we are not decentralized and we don't have a lot of people doing this, it's too easy to shut it down. But if you disperse it to the public, and that's why on our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, there's an app. You can put it on your phone, turns your phone into a magnetic field meter, has all the remote viewing protocols, everything. It's a little app. There's another app that's free that you can download that will show you where CE5 people are in your community that you can meet up with, like Mark here in London or in Brighton and other places. So all the tools are out there if you go there and drill down on that website, so you can do this yourself. All this will be up on the website soon enough. But I think what you want to see is, how do you do this? And that's where you say, well, if the protocols are understandable and everyone can do it, why don't we do it and bypass the bureaucracy of government? We should. But we're doing both. So we should hope and train governments that are friendly to this and let them experiment with it for peaceful purposes. But the real action, really the real power, is with each of you and with all of us together, because that they cannot stop. And they knew that That's why I said you squeeze the toothpaste out of the tube fast enough and hard enough, and that was my objective 25 years ago. So lots of people understand what the contact protocols are, why they work, how you practice them, and then go out and start doing it. You'll be pretty amazed at what will happen. Pretty amazed. Now, it may not be what you're expecting, because most people look at too many Hollywood movies and they don't understand what the nature of interstellar contact is.
Beyond 3D. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Dr. Stephen Greer. That's all we have time for tonight. That was an edited version of Dr. Stephen Greer and his recent talk on the Disclosure Project. Next week, Matt will be back on deck, and hopefully together we can glean through this week and next week's cacophony of disinformation that floods our media and our senses. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and please feel free to share our show. And I do say it some weeks that if one person can share this information with just one other, then eventually we can educate and wake up our world. Good night, everyone, and take care.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.